Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. If you are able to turn your cameras on, we'd love to see you. We'd appreciate that. But if you can't turn your cameras on, we also understand. I want to welcome you all to tonight's program. My name is Andy Engel, and I lead virtual public programs here at Reimagine. This is the first of 3 sessions in the series, The Wisdom of Grieving Parents, Living with Loss and Love. Reimagine, for those who may not know, is a nonprofit organization catalyzing a uniquely powerful community. People of different backgrounds, different ages, different races, different sexual orientations, different gender identities, people of faith, people of no faith, all coming together in community to support one another in facing adversity, loss, and mortality, and to transform life's biggest challenges into action and growth. Reimagine resources, support groups, events like this one today are free, sliding scale, and accessible to the public. This is made possible by the support and generosity of folks like you. So for those who already made a tax-deductible donation when you registered, thank you. Your gift will immediately support Reimagine's mission to help people of all walks of life transform the hard parts into purpose and meaning. I'm going to start with a quote from the novelist and essayist J. Nugeboren. A wife who loses a husband is called a widow. A husband who loses a wife is called a widower. A child who loses his parents is called an orphan. There is no word for a parent who loses a child. That's how awful the loss is. Yes, it's true. There's no common word for grieving parents in the English-speaking world. Perhaps that's because this loss is so catastrophic. But other cultures have found a way to name this. In China, where there was a one-child policy until 2015, there are shidu parents. In Sanskrit, the term is viloma. Some might know that. But if folks are familiar with terms for bereaved parents in other languages, I'd be curious to know what those are. So please start using the chat. If you know of a term for bereaved parents in other languages, please paste that. Henry Cameron Allen is a Reimagine collaborator and a bereaved parent. He came up with a new term, peregrine, as in peregrine falcon. Peregrine parents wander. They find themselves in a foreign landscape where no one speaks the language. They get lost, and they need support to return home. This gathering and this 3-part series is for bereaved parents, but it's also for everyone who knows a bereaved parent. Grief literacy is lifelong learning. What ways can we, as friends, colleagues, and family, show up for individuals whose children have died? That grief is also lifelong. Today, our Let's Learn session is about gaining knowledge. It's about listening and witnessing through the stories of our incredibly accomplished speakers. Next week is going to be more participatory if you sign up. You'll experience a workshop led by Myra Sack with an assist from Dionne Monsanto. And the final session is going to be a conversation between Joyal Mulheron and Dr. Joanne Cacciatore. Like all our speakers in this series, Joyal and Dr. Jo are bereaved parents who support others like them. And in different ways, they advance social change for all bereaved parents. So my colleague Nicole Tan will paste a link in the chat where you can register for those 2 sessions. Please do so. And a few words about Zoom. For those who wish, you can click on the CC icon to get a transcript of what's being said. I will do that momentarily. And if you'd like to see the recording of the full transcript, click on the CC icon and select the View Full Transcript option. And you can also save and download the chat by clicking on the three dots within the chat box. Feel free to send me or Nicole a note in the chat, and we'll try to help you out if you're having any technical problems. Okay, good to see all of you. Just a bit more about our speakers before we begin. You can read their full bios in the event description that you use to register, but I don't want to take away from our time by reading their bios to you. They'll introduce themselves and share their stories over the next 70 minutes. We'll leave time for Q&A at the end. So as you listen, if questions do come up, please use the chat to ask your question. I'm going to help field those questions to our group. And what I'll say is that about our speakers is that they have many identities and they have many skills. One is a theater and film director. One is a former TV producer. One is a yoga instructor and dancer. They are all published authors. They have created foundations and nonprofits. But tonight, above all, I want to honor them as bereaved parents. Colin Campbell, dad of Ruby and Hart. Michelle Hord, mother of Gabrielle. Dionne Monsanto, mom of Seaway. My main thought partner on this series is Myra Sack, who is moderating tonight's discussion. She was a speaker last fall in our series on anticipatory grief. She's the mother of Javi. She's an athlete. She's a big soccer fan. She's the founder of Emotion, a co-host of this series. Myra, thank you so much for being Reimagine's midwife to birth this series. I could not have done this without you. I'm handing this over to you.
Wow. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Reimagine. It's a real honor. And my name is Myra Sack. I'm really, truly touched to be in this experience tonight with such beautiful, bold, brilliant parents as panelists in Colin, Dionne, and Michelle. I'm a compassionate bereavement care provider, and my daughter's life and death is what brings me to this work and to us tonight. Purple is Javi's color, so I'm always rocking it. And at this time, I would just invite each of you to share your person or people who bring you here tonight by writing their names in the chat and honoring the power of naming in grief. So it would be a gift to all of us to see their names, and there's never any pressure. As those gorgeous names are populating our chat, I want to shift us into a moment of mindfulness and just ground us in 3 values tonight. The first is the power of presence and being where our feet are. So if you would, just wiggle your toes wherever you are, wherever they are dangling. If you can, then make contact with the ground, the floor, the carpet, the dirt beneath you, and squish your heels into the ground. Then we'll follow that energy all the way up our bodies. And once we get to our nose, let's take a big inhale through our nose. And when you think you've got all the air you possibly can, I want you to just take an extra sip at the top to try to avoid underbreathing. And a big exhale, imagine that breath landing at the toes we just wiggled. So we'll just do it once together. So here we go. Take a moment and tap our hearts 3 times and just embody the power of honoring any feelings, all feelings. They're all welcome. Watch as they move throughout this session. And finally, we're going to connect versus compare here. You'll hear from Michelle Hord at some point. She, in her gorgeous book, refers to the Grief Olympics, and we're going to avoid the loss Olympics at all costs tonight. And so to embody that, indulge me, we'll lift our elbows like this, And we'll just kind of tap elbows to the person to our left and right in their Zoom boxes. And we'll connect at our own deepest pain from our heart space to try to access someone else's. I'm going to read a very short poem, and then you'll hear from our panelists. This is Yehuda Halevi. "'Tis a fearful thing to love what death can touch, a fearful thing to love, to hope, to dream, to be and oh to lose, a thing for fools this, and a holy thing to love. For your life, your lives have lived in me, your laugh once lifted me, your word was a gift to me. To remember this brings painful joy. 'Tis a human thing, love, a holy thing to love what death has touched." So we've entered this holy space together tonight. I offer this poem as an invitation to be with love, pain, joy, fear, anything that might come up as we move through this session together. And now, finally, I'll invite each of our panelists to introduce themselves. Start with your name, your children's names, and in this moment, what feels most important for you to share about their life and death and your work in this space today. And Dionne, given the month, the fact that Siwe just had a birthday, let's start with you, and then we'll follow with Michelle and Colin, okay?
Thank you, Myra. Thank you. My name is Dionne C. Monsanto. I am here in New York on Lenape lands, and my daughter's birthday, she would have been 29 on Saturday. So my daughter died almost 14 years ago. So this was my 14th birthday without her. It's been a very emotional month, and in setting up for today to be with all of you, she loved Elmo. When she died, she was 15. So behind my laptop, I'm looking at Elmo, and on the other side of my laptop, I'm looking at a picture with her, so they can bring me comfort. So that's what I set up for myself, to bring myself comfort. And a lot of my work around bereavement, similar to Myra, is in with movement, moving the body, dancing, yoga, breathing, as well as coaching through grief support to find your way back to joy. My daughter very much wanted to be happy, and she unfortunately died by her own hand. And so I do a lot of work with mental health advocacy and suicide prevention. So Saturday was good but rough, and it feels good to share space with all of you to know that it's a constant healing journey. Some of us are newer in this journey and longer, and at almost 14 years in, it's still quite a journey of feeling their absence and their presence. I still have two living children. My oldest son, Sule, is 31. My youngest son, Eric, is 27. My grandson is 2 years old, Eli. So we have all the boys, and my girl watches over me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dionne. And I love how you said "in" when you talked about the amount of time that Siwe hasn't been here. Just this idea that we are living into New Year's without them here is a really beautiful turn of phrase. Michelle, can you bring us to Gabrielle?
Yes, my name is Michelle Hord. My daughter's name is Gabrielle Eileen White, and she was taken from me at 7 years old through a divorce at the hand of her father. And when I think of her, I think of bubbles on the top of seltzer. She was effervescent. It was like her little toes never touched the ground. And this she was taken from me on June 6th, 2017. And I'm now watching her friends have their sweet 16 birthdays. And what I've learned so far, because it is an ever present process, right? Is that to just have the grace to honor where you are today, and that there is no map, there is no finish line, there is no linear level to grief, especially this type of grief. And so to just be okay with where you are today and not measure it against anything else. And so that's what I share in this moment.
Thank you, Michelle. Will you tell everyone briefly about Gabrielle's Playground? Just what's behind?
Yes, since I have it in the background. So, because of how I lost my daughter, and because I've spent my career as a journalist and started my career, um, perhaps ironically, at America's Most Wanted, working on missing children cases, and meeting people at the most, at the darkest moments of their lives, what I knew immediately was that what happened to Gabrielle was not going to be her legacy. And so I started a foundation called Gabrielle's Wings. This was one of our first projects. It makes me really happy. It is a $250,000 playground accessible to children of all abilities. And our foundation has gone on, internationally, focusing statewide now, but on creating safe spaces and places for children, and focusing on social emotional learning. And so for me, and it's different for everyone. I always say to people, you don't need a nonprofit, right? Honor looks different for people. It looks different. I don't have the experience of having another parent to share this with, but I know from my experience that even co-parents have different experiences in losing a child. So for me, honoring Gabrielle is honoring her kindness and her belonging, things that she wouldn't have thought of at 7, but was truly who she was in the work that we do with our foundation.
Thank you, Michelle. And Stacy, I want to acknowledge your question on grace that came in. I imagine that Michelle was, suggesting that there's a whole bunch of self-compassion, self-care when we're trying to figure out how to grieve, what that looks like, and that giving ourselves grace invites this notion of being sort of spacious and gentle and fluid with ourselves as we navigate something that is impossible to try to put into words. And with that, Colin, I'd love to bring Ruby and Heart into the conversation, and your book, Finding the Words. So welcome, Colin.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm honored to be here. I just wanted to just honor all the grief and loss that we're all sharing today. Just watching all those names go by, it's beautiful and hard. It's beautiful and hard. Thank you all for showing up. So my children, Ruby and Hart, Ruby was 17 and Hart was 14 when we were struck by a drunk and high driver, going 90 miles an hour, and both of them were killed in the back seat. And June 12th, 2019. And I want to say Ruby was an extraordinarily gifted artist. She really was. I know that you say like, oh, she was 17 and an artist, and you picture little kids with crayon drawings, but she was actually quite stunning, quite a brilliant artist, and so fun, such a fun spirit, adventurous. She was a real adventurer. She would climb crazy high trees, like crazy high trees, and was always down for scaling a mountain. And her brother Hart, he was the clown. So he was a class clown. He always had an entourage of kids following him, like literally mimicking the catchphrases he would come up with. I remember him coming home once and complaining, like, they're all just saying the same thing I said. And I have to say new things now. It's so annoying. I was like, well, that's so sweet. They all just want to be like you, Hardy. Yeah, he was like a natural leader, and a wonderful performer. So she would set him up. She was like the director and the writer, and he was the actor. And they'd do little skits for me and Gail, my wife Gail, and I. Right now, I'm thinking a lot about the struggle of being in this life and also grieving at the same time. I find that sort of always or often my challenge, that I want to be fully present in this life. And at the same time, I want to bring Ruby and Hart with me in this life. And it's a journey. It's a journey. So their birthdays are, wildly, they were 3 years and 1 day apart. So Ruby would turn 23 on March 29th, and Hart would turn 20 on March 30th. So we've got some birthdays coming up, which is always very challenging. Yeah.
Wow, Colin, thank you so much. Well, now that our circle has expanded in this discussion to include our people, Colin, I want to build off of what you just talked about in terms of how do we integrate? How do we live with one foot sort of in the land of the living and one in the land of the dead? And how do we move given our experiences? And so, can you talk a little bit, Colin, about how you are finding those acts of integration? And then Dionne and then Michelle, will you add on?
Yeah, I think I a lot of times I don't want to compartmentalize my grief. I don't want to like box it up or just have it be certain moments. I want to have Ruby and Hart with me all the time, and that's such a beautiful idea, but it's also very challenging. It's so easy to, in one sense, get caught up in this life, and another sense, get caught up in the loss, and be pulled back, right? And sometimes it's very nice to be pulled back to beautiful memories of Ruby and Hart, and have some nice solid cries. I like that. But there's also the pull of the crash. I was driving, and so almost every time I get behind the wheel, I think about the crash. And I think a lot of people, a lot of parents, a lot of bereaved parents replay in their minds what they could have done to save their child, right? All the things we could have done, what if, what if, what if? And it doesn't even matter how that child died. The parent blames himself on some level or has some like sense of like they should have done something different. And those are, I find, not very helpful, right? To be caught in those moments. So I try to let those thoughts go. Yeah, those are my thoughts right now. I don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Colin. I'm glad. I have to throw in, so my birthday is March 28th. So I will easily be celebrating your babies with you since it's 1 day and 3 days after me.
Happy Aries, huh?
Yes, yes, all the fire. I love what you said about the what if, what if, what if, because something that has brought me grace, and I do a lot with my clients, and my clients have not all lost children, but are grieving. And it's two simple words, and I share this with all of you listening. Um, cancel, cancel. As soon as the thoughts start rolling down some place that is dangerous and it's going to cycle myself into something like, "Hey, cancel, cancel." It's like I did the best I could with the information I had at the time. And I often remind myself of that. And see, it passed in June 29th of 2011. And I did the best I could with the information I had. And even with my adult children, right, and my grandchildren, and watching them, and I was like, you know what? Everybody grows up with some stuff, and I look at them and still say, I did the best I could. So as I say that to myself, I offer that to all the parents, to you, Colin. I did the best I could with the information I had. And when those thoughts pop up, I just go, cancel, 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 cancel. So to the integration, I loved what you said about always living with them. In my home, I'm sitting in my dining room, and I'm looking in the kitchen and at the pictures and the art, because she was also an artist, and there's a self-portrait that's an oil on canvas, and like everywhere there are pictures of us as a family. So she's still very much a part of the family. My two sons and my grandson were here within the past week, and there's a picture of her on the wall that's a painting. So they posed in the picture so it would look like it was everybody. So I could see, my living children. And as I introduce myself, I still say I'm a mother of three, because saying that, like the idea of not talking about my daughter who has passed feels like I'm denying her. So I was like, I have two living children, and my late daughter passed almost 14 years ago. But everyone that knows me knows I have three children. And a lot of people feel like they know her. So I feel honored to be with all of you to share her story and have spaces to talk about our children. But it's always 3 children. And even as I reflected for her birthday, I'm like, I hope she's proud of how I'm living my life in her honor. I hope she would like what I'm doing. Just like we always wanted to make our parents proud. Now I'm like, I hope she's proud of me. I hope she sees what I'm doing and how I've been, and she smiles at me. And yeah.
And what gorgeous smiles both of you have. They're crazy. Michelle, can you add on to this beautiful conversation?
Yes, when I think of Gabrielle, I think of the land of the living and the spirits I can't see. I lost my mother suddenly when she was 50 and I was 24. And I grew up in the Baptist church. My granddaddy's a Baptist minister, so I'm not a PK, but I'm one removed from being a preacher's kid. And for me, my faith has been foundational. And I say that because that's what has worked for me. I think for everyone, whatever gets you to the next, to button your clothes, to zip a zipper, to get out the door is what matters. For me, my faith has been foundational. And so feeling that her presence, that while I am frustrated that I don't realize how close she still is, that she's still that close. And so things like floating in the ocean, where we both loved being in the water, all of the ways that I can still connect with her. And she was a baby. She was 7. And so part of it for me is also experiencing through her friends what it means to become a tween and now a teenager and now a 16-year-old. And the complexity, I think, that all of us can relate to of needing to be apart, right? And having a different experience. And I remember early on, I had one of my best friends, ironically, was pregnant with me. Neither of us knew what we were having. She gave birth 2 weeks before me and had a little girl named her Gabrielle. And I remember saying, so that was our name. And we don't know what we're having yet. And she said it would be cool to have 2 Gabrielles. And so for 7 years and 9 months, we had 2 Gabrielles who would say, other Gabrielle, can you blah, blah. And the other Gabrielle now will be 16 in July. And I both joy and am ripped apart watching her. And so I think when I talk about grace, in my heart, it is giving myself the space I need to feel everything I feel without judgment. And that it is both okay to go watch this beautiful other Gabrielle leap in the Nutcracker and to cry through the whole thing because my little girl wasn't able to do it.
And thank you, Michelle. I mean, that really gets at this concept that's so foundational in grief, which is this unity of opposites, this idea of how do we hold both joy and pain in their deepest, most raw form at the same time, and let inhabiting those 2 spaces sort of expand our existence as opposed to contract, which we're constantly juggling. Is how do we sort of invite community and seek out silence and quiet when we need it. And so thank you all for that, and for sort of bringing to life what it means to live in integration, which is another really foundational concept to moving with grief. I would love to just invite each of your books into this space now. You've all kind of turned to writing in such a powerful way. Dionne, I'd love to start with you. From your book, 101 Ways to Live Life in Joy, which I would recommend. there's a quote that you include in one of your small chapters from Christina Isabel, and where she says, if you are not speaking it, you are storing it.
And it's
And
heavy.
that gets heavy. Can
Hmm.
you elaborate on this for us? How does giving voice to grief support healing, or support healing in you?
Thank you for that. I want to step back before I respond. And something else that Colin said is that I never considered myself a writer. My daughter was a writer. She had written, she had been published, she had met with an editor, she was working on a book. And a part of my living with her and through her and her giving birth to who I am now in this loss was going, well, she couldn't finish her book. I can't finish her book, but I can write one in her honor. And so that was for the 10th anniversary of her death that I wrote it, and then published it around the 11th anniversary. I actually published it on her birthday 3 years ago, allowing myself to have, I'm starting to create good memories on the challenging days. But with that particular quote, often, I think everyone has experienced this. If someone looks at you and it's like, hey, Michelle, how are you doing? And it's like, I'm fine. And you're not fine. And at some point, I started telling the truth. And it's like, how are you doing? It's like, I am dying with a smile on my face. And people don't know how to respond to that, but I look like I'm okay. I've got, I'm healthy, but I really felt like I was dying with a smile on my face. And that became a way of like, and then there was a gauge, like, okay, where are you, like ranging it from 1 to 10. But I feel like if I hold on to something too long, in the same way, if we clench our fists and hold our shoulders, it balls up and it gets stuck somewhere. Especially for me as a yoga teacher, it's going to get stuck in my heart. It's going to get stuck in my belly. It's going to stick in my gut. There's going to be some sort of dis-ease and comfort. And clearly, when we get sick and have illnesses, it's more than us not talking. But I feel personally that adds into it. And the heaviness can lead to isolation if I feel like I can't talk about my pain. And one of the biggest gifts I got with my daughter and sharing what I was going through was learning all of the mental health challenges so many people in the community were dealing with in silence. So many of the issues that had happened with families and partners, and the fact that I was like, this is what happened, and I don't know what to do. It created such a large conversation that continues. And then I felt lighter. So, to that quote, if you don't talk about it, it gets heavy. The fact that I keep talking about it and it winds up empowering someone else, and then they feel lighter, and then we lift as we climb. And that feels good to me.
We
I
live
hope that answered the
time.
question.
Yeah, that was so beautiful. And dying with a smile on my face is, maybe we'll all get that on our some shirts or something, some swag. Colin, your book, Finding the Words, which I'm not going to quote, I'm going to quote you in another article that you wrote, but Finding the Words is well worth the read. I couldn't recommend it more highly. But in this particular piece, you wrote, before Ruby and Hart died, I used to think mourners should be left alone so they could feel sad. And then, once they got most of the sadness out, they could rejoin society, healed and back to normal. But I have since learned that grieving is best practice as a communal activity. Can you talk about the power of ritual and community in your life since
Yeah. 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 I want to say that I just love what Dion just said. I just have to yes and that now with my microphones on. Um, yeah, 100%. I think we process anything by talking about it. Right? We process joy, we process happiness by sharing about it. And so why is it that we don't share grief? Why? Because it makes people uncomfortable, I think, but that's okay. So yeah. Okay. So I discovered how helpful it was to be, public in my grief, I guess, through Jewish rituals of mourning. So I'm not Jewish, but my wife's Jewish. We raised our kids as Jews, and we're a part of our synagogue, a very active part of our synagogue. And I didn't have any cultural traditions around grief from my family, so I had nothing. I was just lost, totally lost. Right? What am I supposed to do? And one of the earliest lessons I learned is the power of community because of Shiva. So Jews sit Shiva for a whole week. So every night people would come to our house. A lot of people came to our house, and my instinct was like, no, I'm supposed to be left alone. Leave me alone. I can't talk to people. This is like the last thing I want, right? My kids were just killed. Why? I mean, people are coming to my house. But then I discovered that all these people who loved Ruby and Hart and who loved Gail and I were surrounding us, and we could have conversations about Ruby and Hart and about grief. And that's what happened. We all told stories and we all laughed and cried together. And it was like, oh, this is grieving. This is what we're doing as a community. We're grieving Ruby and Hart. This is what this is. But then Shiva ends and that structure is taken away, and suddenly people revert back to that same instinctual, like, oh, let's leave them alone. They must be very sad. I have no idea what to say to them. Let's leave them alone. And I was like, wait, no, come back. I still need to talk about Ruby and Hart and grief. I'm not done. A week's not enough. So that was really a wake-up call for me, and I discovered I could have my own rituals. I could have a gathering and people would come and we could talk about Ruby and Hart. And I was like, oh, I could do my own version of not an extended Shiva, but that sense of like gather people together, talk about Ruby and Hart, talk about my grief. And it was good not just for me, but for also my community, because they love Ruby and Hart and they're grieving, right? But I think so often our culture doesn't have structures for that. So we all grieve by ourselves, and it's very, very lonely.
Thank you, Colin. And in the chat, which I'm sure you're not looking at, someone said you could be a rabbi, and I think they're right.
That's very funny.
Such wisdom. Michelle, who also has a gorgeous book on the other side of Yet. And Michelle, you talked already a little bit about your faith, and I would love for you to just share a piece about sort of what it means when you talk about finding your army in grief and why that's nourishing and how to do it.
Yeah, I think we all have ideas about who would be there for us, right, in any given circumstances. And part of grace and grieving for me was also realizing that people come with their own stuff. And so in my situation where we were the Kool-Aid house, for those of you that can access that cultural memory, all the parties, all the everything, and to go from the Kool-Aid house to my ex-husband doing this to our child, which meant other, as the Girl Scout cookie mom, as the PTA mom, that other children had been in my space. There was a ton of guilt to speak about, and Colin, you spoke about, just the guilt and the what did I miss that goes with that a lot of other people in my life felt like, what did I miss? And I had to get to a point where I realized I didn't miss anything because there was nothing to see, that there was nothing visible to see. And so as a mom of a second grader, watching my daughter's peers' parents struggle with what do they even tell their kids? Do they tell them the truth? Do they not tell them the truth? They find out the truth on Google, right? There were so many layers to, and I will cop to it, where I held myself responsible for mothering other children, for mothering other parents. Based on what I lost, and feeling like my grief and my loss had created such an imprint on these second graders that should not have any concept of this. I am not sure, Myra, what your question was, and I'm rambling and I will apologize, but that was what was on my heart.
Beautiful. Thank you. No, and just to bring in kind of finding your army, because you write about that. Yeah.
So what I found was you don't know who will show up in faith. You don't know who will intercede on God's behalf. And so where I had dear friends who were perhaps fellow cookie moms with Girl Scouts or fellow, moms that I talk to all the time, who for their own reasons could not show up. There were women who I wasn't even that close to, who, because of what they had experienced in their lives and their ability to access trauma, their ability to laugh in the craziest moments, became friends. And so I think there is this beautiful opportunity, if you open yourself up to finding your people. And your people may look different than they did the day before this happened, whatever it looked like for you. And just the beauty in the ashes of people who can stand with you in grief, who can stand silently, who can do the stuff like, run interference, who can do the stuff like show up with a meal, who can do the stuff like show up at your house when you said, I don't want anyone there. That it just speaks volumes to the human experience and what we will do for each other. And so I celebrate that. I'm almost at the 8-year anniversary of losing Gabrielle, and I look back at everything that my friends and frankly some associates did on my behalf because it was a crime, because of how it happened. And I just marvel at that love and the ability to be grateful for that love in the midst of such tremendous darkness is the challenge. That is the challenge. And that, I think, is what keeps me going.
Thank you, Michelle. There's so much in there. I mean, I think that, and I'm thinking about a note that came through the chat. Someone mentioned that they've been chastised for grieving their son's death. And so I bring that into this moment in the conversation because I think it would mean a lot to everyone on this Zoom to hear from each of you, and maybe Colin or Dionne, you start on this one. Even though the burden should not be on us to educate, to equip, to help, what has worked in terms of sort of bringing others along, and any other words of wisdom that you have on that particular comment.
Thank you for monitoring the chat. And I love seeing all of our faces. Colin is who I see front. Both of us are like, what? Like, no. It is your right. Like, it is your absolute right to feel how you feel. I often say joy is your birthright. And because we loved our children so deeply and we have lost them, there's a sadness that goes along with that. Like joy, I'm always saying joy and grief can coexist. And so at that point, the education, it is frustrating, but sometimes I would recommend books, I would recommend articles, but I was like, I am good until I'm not. So there's days that I'm great. There are days that we're happy, and there are days, and it was like, there is no timeline. I love that everyone here has said it, like grief is not linear. Grief doesn't show up with an invitation. Grief shows up when you think it's not going to come and you need to be prepared for it. And I guess the kindest thing I've said over the years is that I hope you never have to understand why I'm still grieving. And as I educate, as I advocate, as I support, all of it is active grieving. I'm living in a way to support others, but it helps me to help others because I'm giving the support that I didn't have. And I did have community. I loved what Colin said about community, and what Michelle said about the people. Because I remember there's a dear friend of mine, a widow, no children, and she hated cleaning and she loved wine. And I'm in a house, and I remember coming downstairs, and this particular friend was washing my yellow walls. We're still friends to this day. And I remember saying to her, I will never forget, I've never seen you clean your house, but you were washing my walls. And she goes, your daughter was dead and there was nothing I could do. So I washed the walls. And your tribe will get it. Your army will get it. And I'll pass it on.
Yeah. No, yeah, I agree. Yeah, yeah. I was watching Dionne's face, like, what? Chastised for grieving. Okay, that's wild. But I think the simple answer is that for as long as you love somebody, if they're gone, you're going to grieve that loss. So none of us are going to stop loving our children. So obviously we're going to grieve for the rest of our lives. That's kind of given. That's normal. That's healthy. That's as it should be. So yeah, some people, it's going to be hard to educate because they've got all sorts of their own issues. But I really believe that it, no, but we don't want to have the burden of having, as you said, Myra, the burden of educating others, and yet we're the only ones that really understand what we need in our grief. And so I am a big proponent of sharing our grief needs with our community. I love what Dionne said and what Michelle said about sort of honesty, about being honest, right? This is what we need. This is our deal. And I think a lot of people will rise to the occasion. I think a lot of the problem comes from people who don't know what to do, and no one's telling them. No one's giving them some education about grief. We're a grief illiterate culture, and so I'm a big proponent of taking that extra step, finding a way to educate your community, so they can help you. So yes, a lot of my book is about that. It's about like what did I say to people to actually get the help that I needed. So yeah. But tell that person to read a book or something.
Well, it's such a double-edged sword, right? I am happily remarried and have a 5-month-old little boy, which is a whole completely connected and disconnected experience to become a mother again at a different stage in life. And my husband says now, it frustrates me how much time you spend consoling other people about what happened to you. And, I chuckle at it. And at the same time, I I do think there's an opportunity sometimes to open a door for people who have no concept, who, for me, the people who were most endearing to me were the ones that said, I don't know what to do. There are no words. There are no words. And I would say, you're right. There are no words. And they would ask, what do you need? And I would say, I can tell you what I need right now. Maybe that's dry cleaning. Maybe that's a meal. Tomorrow, it may look completely different. And so just the ability to be fluid, the ability to, a lot of times people don't realize, I often get asked, what do you say? What do you say? And I say, be honest. You don't know what to say. There is nothing to say. And that puts you in a vulnerable position, right? The person who's grieving already has their heart outside of their body. And so for you to have the audacity, the need, the ego to solve, to use God to say something, instead of just saying, I can't imagine, there are no words. What can I do right now? And that opens your vulnerability, right? That you can't solve, that you can't possibly understand. And so that for me has been what I've tried to be a teachable moment with my people through the years is the expectation is not for a solve, for a happy ending, for some sort of linear story arc as someone that works in media, but for someone who's willing to sit in the moment, whatever that moment is, whatever that moment is. And that can be joy, that can be grief, that can be frustration. But the ability for someone to just sit quietly with you, for me, is the most powerful thing that someone can do.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to take a moment. There is so much richness and heartbreak and conversation in the chat in response to this conversation and what's coming up for people. So I am going to sort of organize some of those comments for each of you, but as I'd love to kind of finish this part of the conversation with two questions for each of you. The first is on June, the month of June. Each of your children died in June. And so that means that you have death anniversaries in the same month. And for this group, for each of us, can you share what June feels like now, how you honor it, how that has changed, appreciating that some people are coming into this space in acute grief and what that first death anniversary feels like. So sort of bring the, yeah, I just see some chats on these sort of important moments. Give us some wisdom here on June. And Dionne, you start.
Yeah, what's interesting, since this June will be 14 years for me, and because my daughter died by her own hand, there's a lot of advocacy and things that happen in June in terms of walks and acts that I can take or conferences I attend, advocacy. But there's a conference that they have long-term survivors of suicide loss. And I remember when I first heard about the conference, because I've been volunteering for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention since 2009. And she died in 2011. So I was like, what does that mean? But now, having worn this for almost 14 years, I'm like, oh, it is different. And I don't know how to explain the difference. So my thing is always trying to look at things that we did together and how ways that I can honor the things that we loved for her birthday and for the day she passed. And one of them that is really helpful for me is bringing it up, taking time for myself. And because I'm self-employed, I make sure that June is kind of winding down. I don't expect myself to have a lot of mental capacity. I would never plan to do this sort of talk. Like as a yoga teacher, I had to teach a retreat and it covered this week, and I told the woman, I said, I can work for you, but I can't work on this day. And then she was like, okay. And she forgot. And then I told her, she's like, oh my God, yes, yeah. So it was just a day off in the middle of the retreat. So I could be by myself and do whatever. So it has taught me, and I don't know for the other panelists, but you learn to self-advocate. If you didn't know how to speak up for yourself before, you're going to learn to speak up for yourself now, going, I cannot work on this day. I can't do anything on this day. And leading up to it, my brain protects me. Like there's a brain fog that happens and then it lifts a little while after for the birthday and the death day. There's like a little fog that happens. Like I feel like I'm coming out of the fog and very thankful that this was planned to be in space with all of you. So I'm really thankful to be with all of you after her birthday. But June is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Very similar to Tian. I think I remember the first year, I had so much anticipatory anxiety about both their birthdays, because it's again one day apart, and then the day of their death. And I found that I was so anxious about it that then when the actual day happened, in a way it was a day like any other and it just went by. But then surprisingly, I felt an extra wave of grief hit me afterwards because I had the thought, I struggled so much to get to this day, and the day happened, and they're still gone. They're still dead. And that was like, that hit me. That hit me hard. And that was like a revelation. I did not expect that, right? I thought, oh, I got through it, and then I got hit hard with grief. So now I feel like it'll be 6 years this June, for me, and I feel more attuned to this, the rolling, the waves. I can see them coming a little more, maybe I'm not sure, but I still get surprised. But I think I think that the buildup won't be as intense for me, and the actual day, the intensity level is calmed down, I guess. The highs and lows of grief, not the highs, that's not a good word for it, but the intensity. Oftentimes I do a ritual gathering, so we gather people together. Like Dionne said, I want to acknowledge it. I don't want it to go by unacknowledged. I want to talk about Ruby and Hart. I want to do something with Gail, with some friends, maybe some of Ruby and Hart's friends. So we did a candle lighting ceremony 2 years ago, gathered a bunch of people together and lit the candles. I honestly forget what we did last year. So many different rituals and gatherings, but I don't know what I'll do this year. I do know that I'd like to think more about the anniversary of their birthdays than the days of their death. I do feel like I don't know if I want to honor that day so much. I mean, I do, but you know what I mean? I don't want to give it such a importance. I want to celebrate their lives. That's what mattered. Their lives. I want to focus on that, not how they died, when they died, who killed them. I want to think about them in life. That's what I want to be thinking about.
I have to
Uh,
say amen. The church says amen, Colin, because um, you know, I will be going through my 8th anniversary this year of losing my daughter, and this is the first where I will have had less time with her on earth than time after. And, you know, I have every year's different. Some years it's like just escape, some years it's just get through. Um, but I agree with you that to focus on the darkness um, never gets us anywhere. And again, let me preface that by saying whatever works for you works for you. I don't think there's a right, I don't think there's a wrong. As someone who lost a child who's murdered, um, and murdered by her father, this is my unique experience that that day for me is quiet, is silence, is not, I have not found that doing much on that day works for me. I remember during COVID having a Zoom with some of her friends and just talking about her. But I think the most important thing is that there's not a right or a wrong, that wherever you are in that moment is okay, and that it may look different than it did the year before, that there is no, performance review of you're doing better this year than you did last year, that you are where you are for a reason. This will be the 8th time I have to go through this, and the first time I do it with a child, a living child. And so that will bring its own unique complexity. And so I think more than anything for me, yes, acknowledging and celebrating her birth, fundamental, much more important than how she lived and how she got in the world, much more important than how she died. And understanding that every year will look different, that there's no playbook, and that I cannot measure progress, that I cannot measure healing based on where I am at any given time. And when I spoke of grace earlier, that's what I really meant.
Yeah,
I know you
the
wanted to get to the chat, but I just want to jump in on one thing that I thought, that the other part of that I found on days, and I don't know if any of you had this. Like, I remember it was a Wednesday. So it was Wednesday, June 29th, 2011. And that first year where all the days lined up when it was a Wednesday again, when the funeral was a Saturday again, when all the days, lined up again. I did not realize it consciously, but there's something mystical about our bodies that are very clear on all of this. So it was like, oh, I was like, why is it that my brain is here? I was like, I felt like I was experiencing the week leading up and everything on three different levels, the past, the present, and it was in my body, and it was almost dizzying until it was like, oh, the days are lining up. Okay. So your body, and someone said it to me recently, that called me, because my daughter's birthday was March 8th. Another friend, an adult who died also by suicide, was March 10th. And I kept thinking about you on Saturday, and I didn't know what it was. And she called me. Our bodies remember certain things that our minds may block out. So when you're feeling off, there's some level of acknowledgement of that as well, because I'm like, why am I out of it? What's happening? It's like, oh, okay. Sorry
Right.
to interrupt, Myra.
Not at all. I think this is cellular as parents. It's cellular, so yeah, it lives in us. Colin, go ahead.
I did remember what happened last year. It just
Oh,
occurred to me.
tell us.
And it kind of speaks to what Michelle brought up, which was earlier, which was a bunch of Hart's friends had a gathering the night of the crash, the anniversary of the crash, and they had all gone to college. So he was killed right after eighth grade, and now all these college students are coming back home from college, and they all gathered together, and they invited Gail and I to go, and it was very intense because here we are. Michelle brought this up earlier. Like, you see your kids' friends growing up, right? And it's beautiful, and it's also rips your heart open, right? And we went over to their house, Paolo's house, and he hosted, and there were like 12 kids, and we said to them, "Tell us about your college experiences." So we didn't actually talk about Hart or Ruby. It was so interesting. They just shared what it was like to be in college, the first year of college, and obviously it was all they were here because it was Hart that brought them all together. So it was all about Hart and Ruby, but it was that very powerful experience of seeing these kids growing up and getting that taste, right? We didn't get here how Hart's college was. We got to hear how Hart's friends' college was.
Mm.
Yeah, that's how we handled that last year.
Thank you, Colin. So just for everyone, I want to say a couple quick things. One is there have been a few comments about parents who have lost children to SIDS, and we haven't brought in children who have died young at birth, and I just want to acknowledge that, and sort of name that it can be hard when there are so few memories. In my case, my daughter never spoke a word, and so how to recall, how to recollect, how to bring her into life in a way that is real and raw, and also requires a lot of intuition and a lot of self-trust. And I want to name self-trust in the context of the conversation around how we deal with people who aren't necessarily grief literate, don't know how to show up, and how do we not get angry or disappointed and frustrated, which is natural. And so much of that comes from learning how we build our own self-trust to appreciate the depth of love and pain of our relationship, no matter what people think in terms of how much time or how long they lived, or and so I want to name that, which brings us to a question that came up in the chat. And so please jump in, any of you first on this, but this is about anger and disappointment. And so the question was, how do you not get so angry and disappointed by people who don't show up in the way that you want them to? What do you do about that?
I recall, separate from death. My family's Caribbean. We're from the United States Virgin Islands, and even the fact that my daughter died by suicide. And what Michelle and I didn't discuss, and it's not in my book, but there were some real challenges with her father. So there was she did have a mental health diagnosis, but there were additional triggers with her father for which he went to jail.
Mm.
And what I would say is quite often we always got, and my brain thinks in an accent in terms of, I saw it in the chat, someone said, let them go. But I breathe and I'm always surrounding myself by mirrors. I have a visual of any negativity that's coming towards me. I'm surrounded by mirrors, so it goes back at them. And I'm like, they don't know any better. Hurt people hurt people. Ignorance is bliss. There's all sorts of adages that I say. And it was like, and I try not to let it siphon my energy. But what I will also say, I am not one that's really prone to anger. My youngest son is. So I'm like, okay, this is frustrating. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to move my body. I'm going to move it out of my body. And I find different ways for me. Um, and I can hear my grandmother with I don't know if there's anyone, Caribbean in here, where it's like, I don't have time for the people, you must carry yourself on, right? I see Michelle, like, I don't have time for such. So
I'm married to someone who's half Bahamian and half
I
Jamaican. So
don't
yeah.
have time for such thing, and then it's a long, and you carry on and go where the love is. I go where the love is. Create it, manifest it. I go where the love is. And do work on relieving the anger from my body. That's for me. Okay.
That's so powerful because we have such finite energy, right? And so to expend energy gaming out why people are the way they are, why they are not able to be present in the way that we want them to be present. For me, I have so much in the tank, and whatever that is for them, no harm, no foul, no judgment. I ain't got time for it. And so focusing on where that effort, that love, that warmth, that ability to be vulnerable shows up is where I show up. And certainly there is always, the subtitle of my book is Finding Light in the Midst of Darkness. There's always the darkness. There's always the darkness in these scenarios. And trust me, you cannot be holly hobby when your 7-year-old is murdered by your husband. So I am not in any way expressing any sort of crazy euphemism, but at the same time, when you are desperate for light in the dark, to focus where it gets darker and deeper will only sink you lower. And so that is how I have survived. Was, yes, I would have liked for this person to have been there for me, and yet someone who I never could have imagined showed up with dinner and a movie and a bottle of bourbon. And wow, we had some really raucous laughter. And so, there is also, where there is a darkness, there's also always beauty, and there's also always the opportunity for gratitude. And again, I'm not trying to pretend like everything is Pollyanna, but you'll find what you look for. And so for me, in such difficult, dark circumstances, looking for those opportunities where the human spirit is brave and where people step out on my behalf when they don't have to, has been what I've chosen to focus on.
I think I agree with everything you've said. I find that I have a lot of rage. I'm not very comfortable with anger. I have a lot of rage, and it's not really actually directed at the woman who killed my kids. It's like at the universe. It's like at the random person who cut in front of me or who said something rude to me. I just want to kill them, like actually kill them. And I'm like, oh wow, I'm out of control, right? This is grief. This is grief rage taking over. And early on, Gail and I, we did this thing called the hate du jour. So we'd go home and then we'd like tell each other these funny stories about how horrible this person was. And we'd say the most vicious, cruel things about this person to each other, and we'd have a lot of fun with it. So it was like our way of like taking this rage and making it entertaining for us. My wife's a very gifted writer, And so and we both enjoy comedy. So they were pretty good takedowns. And sometimes they'd be of innocent people, right? Someone who's just like really loving. It's like, oh, like they looked at us with a little bit too much pity. Oh, how are you? And we're like, ah. And then Gail and I would just go off on them, but they would never know. So it was harmless. We weren't hurting anybody. No one knew about our private hate du jours. But I will say, in terms of like people not getting it, I also have a lot of compassion for them many times because I didn't get it before I lost Ruby and Hart. I was not a good friend to somebody in grief. I was scared of grief. I thought they should be left alone. And I thought, like, it's a nice thought to leave it alone because I don't want to deal with the discomfort. And so I have a lot of empathy for people who struggle to be in space with me. And so that's why I think it encouraged me to express my grief needs more clearly because I want to give them the benefit of the doubt for as long as I can. Some people aren't going to get it, but I think many people will.
Colin, grief du jour,
Hate du
hate
jour.
du jour is amazing and brilliant. And I think part of why it's so brilliant is because that anger has to be expressed, like, and it's energetic. There's a real energy to anger and rage, and back to Dionne's, when we neglect it, it gets stored, and it often gets stored in these really unhealthy ways. And so there was a question in the chat that's gotten a few comments that I want to bring up because I think it's really important. It was from Lynn, and it's that her brother hasn't acknowledged her daughter's death, and that's a relationship with her brother that she can't just give up on. And yet there's a lot of anger, and of course. And so before I sort of weigh in, would love to hear from Michelle, Dionne, or Colin on how might you approach him.
I can speak from very personal experience. My brother, I met my then husband through my brother. He was his RA in college. And I have a niece and a nephew who, especially my niece, who was just a year older than my daughter, who I feel like were protected and shielded and put in a space where my daughter's life and death were not acknowledged. And to this day, several years later, I struggle with that. And so, you know, it's the survival in me. Yes, I definitely have the FU du jour to be a little less gracious than you, Colin. And at the same time, I know that if I allow that to fester too much inside of me, it will destroy me. And so I do the best with what I can, which is have a relationship with my niece, which is have a relationship with my nephew, which is talk about my daughter in front of my niece, which probably would not have happened otherwise. Acknowledge that my brother, who was 21 when I was 24, when our mother died suddenly at 50, never processed that. And just not allowing anyone else to define the importance or the gravity of my journey. And I think a lot of times we look for affirmation, we look for others to somehow underline or be in the amen chorus. And I was really clear from day one that the specificity of my loss, and again, I don't believe in a grief Olympics, but that it was so specific and so unique that I could not possibly expect people to get it. It wasn't my job to teach them. It's not my job to hold them in my pain, but to expect to get milk from the hardware store is also not productive. And so to find that space where I share in the way I need to share, I don't worry about the discomfort that perhaps it brings others. And as a writer, not needing them to finish my script, not needing them to behave or respond or say what I would like them to. is somewhat freeing, because otherwise it is just all consuming. The fact that others won't get it, won't try to get it, will run from it. And to me, that energy does a disservice to my baby. Um, and I don't need others to acknowledge. I acknowledge. And that's their shit. Excuse my, that's theirs and not mine to hold. And so I focus on me, and whatever they can or can't process will be theirs to deal with.
I just want to point out that the preacher's daughter is the one who's using all the foul language.
Granddaughter.
Granddaughter.
That one step is going to give me my grace. That's all I got.
All right, fair. I'm wondering about this brother and what's going on, because I'm wondering, is it a case of such grief illiteracy that's out there, that thought of like, we don't want to talk about the grief because it makes it worse, or that people are stuck in grief because they keep talking about it, right? There is that thought out there that like, oh, I got to protect this person by not talking about it because I don't want to get them trapped in grief. And it's actually the opposite. I'm sure all of you know that, but this brother doesn't, that we actually move through our grief by talking about it. And that allows us to be present in this life. And if we're not allowed to talk about our grief, that's when we get stuck in the past. So I wonder if that's like a case of ignorance. And then another case that I had that maybe is similar is my mother told me at one point, she said, I don't need to talk about Ruby and Hart because I think about them every day. And I said to her, well, that's nice, but imagine what it's like for me. What if the whole world never mentioned Ruby and Hart again? What would that do to me if nobody would ever say their name again, as if they never existed? And that like woke her up. And she was like, oh, okay. And I said, I need you to talk about Ruby and Hart. I just said it. I need you to say their names. And then she did. And then she did afterwards. So, but again, it might be also that the brother is a real asshole. I don't know, an irredeemable asshole, in which case what Michelle is saying is like, we have a limited amount of energy and get what you can get out of this guy, but I don't know. I don't know what's happening with this brother who won't acknowledge the loss of a child. That's rough.
I don't know that I have much to add other than I'm still a big proponent of go where the love is. And as close as I am to my family, if any of y'all are talking to me and somebody like, I don't care who it is, mother, father, sister, brother, if you are not in line with elevation and love and light and supporting me moving forward, they're getting left. Like we just had Harriet Tubman Day, right? So I was like, if I'm Harriet Tubman and you talking nonsense, I'm like, well, you gonna get shot or you gonna get gone, because I don't have the capacity for this. So in terms of like, even for me, I got chills, like I am moving forward and I am choosing to move forward. So you can choose to move forward with me or be gone. And I'm fortunate that most of my family is still in my circle, but there are some that are not. And I'm like, well, that's their loss. I can support and be here for people globally in the world and create education. And there's some people in the family, it's like, and I don't want to do a deep dive on why they don't have the space to understand. I think similar to what Colin is saying, there's something there for them that's too difficult for them to move through. But it's not for me to carry. Like y'all can't see me in this camera. I'm like 5 feet short. I can't carry all their drama. I can't carry it. Nope. Me and Harriet Tubman, we're moving forward. So.
Well, on that, we're gonna end on Harriet Tubman. I'm gonna pass it to Andy in a moment. I want to thank Gabrielle's mom, Seaway's mom, Ruby and Hart's dad, and everyone here tonight, each of your children. I honor the pain, the depth of the pain and heartbreak that's been shared in this chat, the vulnerability, the honesty, the rawness. Thank you all for trusting us. We don't take it lightly. And here's to Andy for what's next.
Thank you, Myra. And thank you, Dionne. Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Michelle. Thanks to all of you, especially those who have been using the chat tonight. I do want to share this opportunity that we have at Reimagine. Um, uh, it is a new uh, opportunity. Reimagine is developing something in the digital space. It's a healing and growth platform. It's a safe space um, for those to feel supported by like-minded individuals experiencing challenges like you, all of you bereaved parents, especially. And it's an opportunity to unlock your creative potential. All these folks who spoke tonight, these four individuals all wrote books. I'm not suggesting that you're all going to write books, but this is a creative opportunity as well to channel your experiences and emotions into some sort of action and growth. As part of this platform, we are offering a pathway for groups called Why Wait? And it's designed to help you take steps towards setting goals, fulfilling wishes, and completing chapters in your life. We have a few seats left. It could be pursuing a dream, it could be deepening relationships, it could be something else. Um, we have some details here that Nicole will share in the chat. The program runs 10 weeks and it kicks off on April 9th. And it's a guided experience offering self-reflective activities, deep discussion, a personalized project focused on growth. If it speaks to you, we invite you to learn more. There's details in the registration link. And if you have questions specifically about the program, please email Deb Gardner. Her email is in the chat. And we ask you also to complete a survey that we're putting in the chat as well. We'd like to hear from you what worked well, what can be improved in this particular session. To be honest, I don't think much can be improved. I thought this was totally awesome. Please complete the survey while this experience is still fresh in your mind. Also, it helps. And at the end of the survey, you'll have an opportunity to make a donation if you haven't already. We'd appreciate that. Gifts, big or small, doesn't matter. It's all good. It's all appreciated. Thanks for sticking around, everyone. We're beyond 8:15. I want to wish everyone a good night. We hope to see you at next week's session. We have more Myra and more Dionne for something that's more embodied, something that's more experiential. So please come next Wednesday. And I look forward to seeing some of your faces again. Good night, everyone.